Velkommen og god dag alle sammen. Today we are speaking about some different names of Odin. Odin, Wōden, Wōdanas, we see all of these different things. What are they and where do they come from? Well, I'm going to tell you here, and I'm also going to go into a bit of history into the different a few of the different Germanic languages, because that's all it is. All these names for Odin, they're just different names of how Odin was said in the different places where the Germanic languages were spoken. So let's start on a few of them. Here's the first one. This is Odin. In Old Norse, this is the one that we all know, and the one that 99% of the mentions of Odin are from. It was used in Norway in the Viking Age, Denmark, Sweden, all of that, Iceland, all of that was Old Norse. It was. And that's really where we have all of our sources from Odin. We do have use of Odin in other language that I'm going to go over right after this, but there are, in those languages, you got to understand there's just like one or two mentions, maybe in a charm or perhaps a runic inscription, but really Odin, like we see here in Old Norse, that's really what 99% of all the mentions of him come from it in the Old Norse language. But let's go on to some others. Wōden. This was how it was said in Old English and also Old Saxon. Now, Old English was used from about the mid 400s until about 1066 when the Norman invasion happened. And after that, a whole bunch of French influence came into England and they started to speak a little bit different. And Old English is actually not a native English language at all, actually, because before about the 400s, England and other territories in the British Isles spoke different Celtic languages, and they had a Celtic religion, so it would not have been Odin that they were worshipping as their main god. It would have been Lugh, or perhaps the Christian religion when that came around for a short period of time in the 300s to the mid 400s. Then, after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s, the pagan people from northern Germany and Netherlands and Denmark, that area, they migrated into Britain and settled there. They basically pushed out all of the Celtic people, all of the Celtic language, and all of the Celtic religion, and they brought their own Germanic language and pagan religion there with them, and took over most of England, really. And England remained pagan for a couple hundred years, actually, after that, which is why we find the god Wōden in some Old English texts. And this was the language that was used by England for about 700 years. Then, like I said, in the mid 1000s or 1000s, we start to see a change when the French came in and did all that. But if the French never conquered England, then probably Germans, Dutch, Scandinavians, and English may still be able to understand each other today, but because the French came in and influenced that northern German or southern Danish language, that's the one that was spoken in England at that time. And if French didn't have any real influence on that, then they would have still been speaking the same language, possibly. So that's the other language, Saxon, that this says Wōden this way. So the Germanic people that came into England this time were the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons, which is where the Old Saxon word comes from. So Old Saxon is also called Old Low German. They also had this same word, Wōden, and in this language was documented from about the 700s until the 1100s. But of course, they had this language for much longer before this. It was just we don't have any written records of this. It's not because they didn't write before this. It's because the Christians came in and destroyed all pagan literature and art. And this where they're speaking Old Saxon was actually pagan for quite a while. It was pagan until around the year 800 when Charlemagne came in and kind of forced Christianity upon everyone there. So this area that spoke Old Saxon was the Netherlands, northwestern Germany, and maybe little parts of Belgium there, and southern Denmark, and it was almost identical to the Old English language spoken there. So they would have understood each other pretty well at the time, and they had the same name for Wōden. So as you see here, so one text that you see this use of Wōden was in the 9 Herbs charm. And I did a video about this before, which I'll put in the link in the description, but it's just a little song and a herbal potion to cure a snake bite. And that's a pretty cool one. I'll put a link to that in the description below where you can read a little bit more about it. Then we have Wōtan or Wuotan, like I'll put up here, and how you write these. The Old High German. This is the language that this was written in, and this language was spoken from about 750 until 1050. But again, it was probably spoken a lot longer before that. We just don't have any written records from before then. So I think there was some other forms of this, like Óðinn or Wuotan, like I'll put up here, but that was just local differences in dialect. Remember, the area that spoke Old High German was not very large, but it was very, very divided. It was tons of small little tribes living in very heavily forested areas, so they were very, very divided. So that explains why there were so many different dialects in such a small area. So I'll maybe show a map up here. The area that spoke Old High German, it was at its most wide. It was central Germany, parts of Switzerland, Austria, even Italy, and even getting a little bit east there into the Czech Republic, maybe Poland, as you can see in this map here. Just keep in mind that this was after the migration period, where people from the north of Germany migrated in heavy numbers into the south of Germany and also west up into England in this area, right around the 300s to 400s. So most of those areas that were here before the Germanic tribes came in this middle area of Germany, they were speaking a Celtic language not too far before, or even Latin if it was in Italy, or a Celtic with some kind of Latin influence. So one example where we see this version of Wōtan is in the Merseburg Charms. And it's a song that speaks about Wōtan in the woods. He's riding through the woods, and the horse breaks his leg. And this was a song that you could sing that was a magical incantation to fix the horse's broken leg. So I went over these 2 charms using the different forms of Odin, and I just wanted to mention that there are other mentions of these forms of Odin in the historical texts. But most of it comes from quite a bit later on in time, like from chronicles that were written in the 1200s at the earliest. So that's about it. And those are the different ways to say Odin. I'll speak about maybe one more form of Odin before we finish, and that's Wōdenas that we see somewhere. So this was actually the original name for Odin when you go back far enough. All of these Germanic languages, they spoke the same language. So this is Proto-Germanic that you've all heard of. So keep in mind that we have pretty much no Proto-Germanic texts, so we don't actually know what the language really looked like. But we can look at later languages that stem from it, like Old Norse and Old English and Old High German and a lot of different ones there. And we can have a really good idea, actually, of what the original word would have been. And scholars have actually been able to recreate this entire language of Proto-Germanic with almost no texts in that language to look from. So they just do it by analyzing the languages that stem from it and then reconstructing what the original mother language would have been before they all branched off. So we are pretty much 100% certain that this Wōdenas was the original name for Odin that all of the people used in the Germanic-speaking areas. Now, Proto-Germanic was spoken from people from roughly about 500 BC, most people agree upon, until the migration period in the 300s AD. So that's when the language really started to branch out and evolve into those different languages that I spoke about. However, I'll end this video by saying one thing, that all of these languages were different. Old Norse, Old English, Old High German, Old Dutch, and Gothic, and all those ones, they were very different. But they could understand each other for quite a long time. It was similar enough that they could understand each other if they spoke to it. Old Norse and Old English were quite different when written down in the year 1000, for example, but we have plenty of records showing that the Vikings and the English of that time, they understood each other pretty well. So all of the Germanic languages at this time were close enough that they could understand each other, and these different forms of Odin help show this. So very little difference. Different words, but you get the meaning, you understand the meaning. It would not have been super easy for these languages to understand each other. It's not really comparable to, say, American English and British English, for example, where you can understand pretty much 100% of what people say, or at least 95%. But you can maybe compare it to if a Scottish person today was speaking to a Jamaican. Yeah, it would be some communication problems for sure, but the main idea would get across when they spoke to each other, and it would be not too much of an issue to communicate. So that's about it for this video and the different forms of Odin. I will speak about some of the other gods and their different names in other videos. Vi ses nästa gång.